Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where it is you're joining us from today. On behalf of Stores Knowledge Series and UGAM Solutions, I'd like to welcome you to today's web seminar. I'm Harry Lister, Vice President of Stores Media, and I'll be your host for this event. We're excited to present today's topic to you, Become a Stealth Retailer, Leveraging Consumer Signals to Make Better Pricing and Assortment Decisions. In this webinar, we'll use research from Gartner on multi-channel retailing to show how companies interpret and leverage consumer insights. Data from Amazon and several other large retailers will be used to illustrate who's providing customers with what they want and who's falling short. By the end of this webinar, you will be on a path to applying stealth competitive strategies to accumulate and analyze consumer signals to identify the right assortment at the right price with the right content. Let me take a minute to introduce our speakers. Kevin Sterniket is Vice President Research, Consumer Value Chain for Gartner. Kevin researches and analyzes pattern-based strategy optimization activities within the demand-driven value network of manufacturers and retailers. Sudhir Halla is Senior Vice President and Head of Retail for UGAM Solutions, where he's focused on leading actionable insight solutions for the retail industry. Before I hand the reins over to today's speakers, I need to go through a few housekeeping items. First, let me remind attendees that the audio portion of the webinar will stream through your computer, so there's no need to dial into a phone line. Throughout the presentation, you'll be able to interact with the speakers through our question and answer capability. Please feel free to ask a question at any time during the presentation. Simply click on the question button on the left side of your webcast console and key in your query. I'll receive those questions and read them to the speakers after they finish with their prepared remarks. We'll respond to as many questions as possible during the Q&A session and promise to have you back to work in no more than an hour. Also, you can enlarge the slides at any time by clicking on the square icon in the upper right corner of the slide. The slides will advance automatically, so you don't need to click anything to follow along with the presenters. At this time, we also suggest that you turn off your pop-up blocker if you've not already done so. And finally, the archive of this presentation will be available for viewing for the next 12 months, so feel free to watch it again or refer it to a colleague. We're excited you joined us today for what we hope will be a very informative webcast. Now let's get started with the presentation. Kevin?
Thank you so much, Harry. It's my pleasure to be able to address you today and wherever you might be in the world. It's quite an exciting time in retail. And in my corner of the world, there's a lot of activity going on with retailers working to understand their customers and how they improve the way they offer their assortments, prices, and promotions to their customers. So in thinking about that, what I've done is put together some content that really speaks to what's happening today and what retailers are focused on, and what are some areas that retailers need to address in order to truly become a stealth competitor. And by stealth, I mean doing things that are relevant and important to your customers that may not be so obvious to your competitors, but very well recognized by your customers. When we think about our customer in the marketplace today, there are many shapes, faces, and forms of the customer, and these customers have different expectations and different demands. In fact, the same customer in two different stores of the same brand may have different attitudes and preferences. And the same customer in different channels of the same brand may have different preferences and expectations. So much more so when they think about the customer moving across brands. There's also influences upon the customer and questions that the customer is asking. Things about the customer that really help shape and determine customer activities and behaviors. And customers are certainly shaped and change the way they think about things given opportunities that are presenting themselves in the marketplace today. There's no doubt that the transparency and empowerment that customers possess today has changed the way customers think about shopping and buying products in the marketplace. Just think about how difficult it might have been just even 5 or 6 years ago to do a price comparison across 5 or 6 retailers when you're standing in a store or when you're looking at what might be available online. Very different experience than what it is today. Further, the economies of our global experience have pressure and influence on the customer, and they influence the customer in different ways. We see spikes and improvements in sentiments in certain areas of the world, and then we see troughs and declines in others, and those impact the customer. This creates extreme volatility, which makes it difficult to really understand where customers are and where they will be in the future. The systems of the past were developed based upon trends, expecting that whatever you might be looking at, be it a forecast or merchandise assortment or even prices, that customers will typically behave in a similar way that they have in the past. But with information that's instantly available and people sharing their sentiments more freely and openly than they ever have in the past, things are changing much quicker and moving in directions that are less predictable than they've ever been. There's also some extra influences that are changing the way customers think about how they shop and how they buy. More customers are looking at Amazon.com first than going to Google when they think about product searches and comparative prices. It's becoming nearly the standard to look at what is the best price for an item. Others influences are that customers are really expecting things in real time. They want things now, and they want instant gratification. And this is changing the way customers think and how they shop and what they expect. Well, these are likely things that we all are experiencing, whether we've been able to identify them or not, but certainly have impacts upon the customer and how retailers and customers engage in a dialogue. One of the things that our research shows is that the landscape of retail is changing. We do believe, however, that regardless of how many dollars move to the other channels like e-commerce and otherwise, that the store will continue to be the hub of retail. But the role of the store changes. We believe that the role of the store is really the experience center. But as the channels and these touch points for customers change, it really bodes to suggest, how does a retailer work within these different environments? For example, if you have a catalog and you set forth an assortment, you're fairly committed to that assortment for a long period of time until the next catalog is printed. In an e-commerce environment, it's very easy to move items in and out of the assortment, as well as change prices by the moment, by the hour, by the day. In a brick-and-mortar environment, it's not so easy to change the price every minute or hour and to change the assortment so quickly. And so while we know that the customer has different expectations and desires by channel, so too are the types of information that we ought to be thinking about when we're making decisions that address what customers are looking for. Another very interesting aspect of what's happening within the consumer's mind is how the consumer is shopping. Now, this chart shows some data on how customers are researching products and how they're purchasing products, the difference between in a store and online. We believe that the online dark blue is going to continue to grow and expand to fill more of the space of the light blue. And we're seeing trends in all of the areas that are identified here on this chart. And as we see purchases happening in a fractional way now, they seem to be trending in the direction of where the consumer is researching. So where you see home improvement projects now researching 34% but only purchasing online 11%, we believe that those numbers are going to continue to change. Where the dark blue grows, in essence, the online grows for the customer. Now this suggests that there's some real important dynamics in play that need to be addressed. And one of the practices that we're focused on within our research at Gartner is really how a retailer becomes a customer-centric enterprise. And this idea of a customer-centric enterprise just doesn't mean, let's think about the customer when we're making our decisions. It really means that the entire organization changes the way they think about retailing. For example, in the past, most retailers are product-centric. Buyers say, I have items I want to sell. How do I best sell them to the customer? What promotions, what assortments, what space allocations, what mediums do I address the customer with? A customer-centric organization says, I have customers. What do they want to buy? And how do they want to buy it? Because not all customers will continue to want to buy in the method that they have purchased things from retailers in the past. We have seen whole industries shift from visits to locations to totally online. You can think of video rental, or you can think of music or books. And there's still small percentages that you might call them audiophiles or whatever, that prefer to have the physical experience where they're in the store and they physically flip through the media, but that is a very small percentage of the business today. And we see that this will continue, this shift, not orphaning the retail location, still becoming a experience center, but one that successfully understands how to address the customer in ways that most retailers are not today. And this is a really important element to consider when you think about things like pricing. So when I think about the best retailers in the business and how they think about pricing, what they're really trying to do is to say, what is the right price that the most number of customers are willing to pay given the way customers value these products? That's very different than saying, I have products that have cost and I need to make a 30 margin. Because in reality, the customer could care less how much it costs you to procure the product and prepare it and bring it to market. And if they don't value the product commensurate with the procurement process and the costs associated, then there's a mismatch between the customer's willingness to pay and the retailer's ability to sell. And so what we see within pricing is some very interesting behaviors of leading companies. There's about 400 companies today who are using some form of price optimization to figure out the best prices using demand models. But that's not enough in the marketplace today, because that's only one part of it. It's also, what is the strategy? So at the end of last year, I took a look at what was the 5-year financial return for retailers that are considered EDLP, like Walmart and Costco, versus the 5-year financial return to the stock market for publicly traded companies that are considered high-low. And you might think that highly promotional companies have greater appeal in the marketplace and have greater penetration and have greater foot traffic and have greater sales. But we can clearly see that the pricing strategy that a company chooses is really important and can dictate a large amount of the company's success. However, I'm not advocating that you instantly change the pricing policies that you have used in the past, and we have seen how dangerous that can be in the marketplace today. What I am advocating is a careful study of what does the customer expect from you and how do they expect it, because that will lead and guide the practices that you engage in. And maybe they want high-low in certain categories, but they want everyday low price in other categories. One thing's for sure is that the best pricing strategy for a brick-and-mortar retailer that also has online and also has catalog is to not price them the same. Now, in the strategies that Gartner has published, we suggest that you should have systems that will allow the prices to be the same, because the customers certainly will not accept the fact that well, that's the online price, and our systems don't talk to each other, so we can't be the same price. But the customer does allow and will permit differences given the right process, given the right education, and given the right approach. Customers, for example, understand that you have online competitors. Customers definitely understand what the right price is, and they have lots of ways to learn what those prices are. Many retailers are working to extract competitive prices from online sources and using technologies like you'll hear later today to understand what those prices are. But that's just part of the problem. Knowing what the price is certainly important. But there's so much more to the challenge. So for example, a stealthy competitor would examine their competition and understand when price checks occur. So for example, you might have a competitor that checks your prices on Tuesdays, and then they adjust their prices based on a reaction or proaction to you proactively to change prices on Wednesday. So what would happen if you changed your prices on Wednesday and changed your price back on Monday night? Well, a simple example, this competitor that was checking you on Tuesdays would never even know that you had a different price. And so it's the art of understanding not only your customer, but also understanding the options and choices that your customers are being presented with, and then providing guidance based upon those responses, the competitive checks, in this case around pricing, to game and strategy the best approach to become a stealth pricing competitor. It means that it's more than just flat and straight rules. It means that you understand that maybe you have items that are selling 100 pieces a day, and your competitors are selling the same item, and they lower the prices, and there's no impact on your volume. That's a clear indication that for your customers in your channel, that item has an inelastic price profile as it relates to the competitors. However, if the opposite occurs and they lower their prices and your volume takes a dive, then you certainly understand that there's a correlation between what your customers are looking at and what your competitors are pricing. So knowing is very important, but taking it to the next step and being able to apply intelligent rules as well as intelligent strategies that recognize the conditions that I mentioned earlier is very important to the process of becoming a stealth competitor. Now, I suggested a moment ago what our advocating pricing strategy is, and I think it's important to really call it out. We believe that retailers need to have the ability through their systems to offer consistent pricing. But we also believe that they should be using optimization technologies for all channels, not just their brick and mortar, to understand consumer behavior, price elasticity, and to use that information to develop flexible, insight-based prices where customers will allow or they will accept different prices. And this allows you to then create an environment that is conducive to your customer. Your customers are your customers, but they also are your competitors' customers. And it's important to recognize the conditions and the transparency that is coming forth. But the worst thing that a retailer can do is declare, for example, that they have stopped showrooming because they are matching the prices of their competitors, because that does not stop showrooming. It addresses one element of why customers showroom, but it is not the entire equation, and just matching price alone does not answer the question either, because if your competitor is always seen as the leader and you're considered a follower, then where do you think your customers are going to be going in the future, at least to even know what the right price is? The next part of the equation of becoming a consumer-centric retailer and a stealth competitor is to really understand your assortment and what you're offering. The idea of offering everything that is available on the planet is not only daunting for the supply chain, but also the management, the procurement, and the buying processes of the teams that are tasked with doing so. If you're going to raise your assortment from 100,000 to 1 million items or 5 million items, there's more than just saying it and then opening the catalog to make it available to the process. For example, how do you help a customer quickly navigate the difference of 100,000 SKUs versus 1 million SKUs? And what are the right million SKUs, and how do you rationalize them? Companies that I speak with today indicate that assortment rationalization and optimization is a top 5 initiative for their business. They recognize the importance of localizing assortments. They also recognize the importance of localizing inventory associated with those assortments, because not all items are created equal as it relates to the regions within the country. And so with this localization and rationalization, there's some intense benefits that come. My research shows that most retailers have between 10 to 18% duplication in their assortment. What is considered duplication? Well, if you're in a typical grocery store and you see 7 flavors of ketchup in a 24-ounce squeeze bottle, that's a duplication. But if you see 7 different types, including flavors and spices or colors or whatever it might be, I remember ketchup for a while there was coming in green. That is speaking to differentiation, not duplication. And so the real challenge is, what is offering the customer choice versus what is getting in the way of the customer's choice? And there's a big difference between that. And one of the things we've learned from many studies that have been conducted by institutions as well as academia is that when customers are presented with too many choices, many times they choose not to choose. And that is a problem. We also recognize that if you reduce duplication, you open the opportunity for differentiation. If you're going to carry products in your supply chain, it needs a warehouse slot or some way to flow through the process. If you have 1 million SKUs and you're used to 100,000, that product has got to be stored somewhere. So what is the right level? What are the right conditions compared to the constraints? And how do you align the assortment? How do you understand what your competitors are doing, and how do your customers respond to those pressures are very important parts of the process. Removing duplication also helps you localize sales and drive improvements with your customers. It helps reduce the supply chain strain. It helps leverage tight labor budgets both in the warehouses and in the stores. It improves the opportunity for private label. And it also offers some opportunities to go direct to consumer, even for the manufacturers. There's some pretty intense benefits that come when you are able to improve your assortment in ways that tune with the customer. What we've learned is that it's important to have a study of the customer, to not just look at the numbers of what your competitor is selling and how many items they match, etc., but to understand why your customers are buying, what they expect from you. When they buy, how much do they buy, and what else do they buy? And what would they do if they're given a different set of choices? Technologies today can provide buyers with great information around these questions. It also means that leaders have taught us that rationalizing the assortment helps improve the opportunity for differentiation. And when you are able to sell differentiated products, you have opened the door to a competitive position that in many cases means that you stand alone in the marketplace selling products that only... Now, some retailers have chosen to look at their assortments by cutting the long tail and by looking at those items that have low volume or low profitability, and in looking at that, kind of thinking about how the item pays the rent. Does it pay the rent in the channel or in the store? And the caution that I would give, and what leaders have told me in their experience is that many times the long tail, those low-moving items, represent true differentiation. And that's the last place that you want to cut. Leaders have also described the importance of applying demand science and demand modeling to help identify winning products, and to look beyond the category to understand the total impact. So an assortment might be right for the category, but it might be wrong for the brand. It's important to make sure that the customer recognizes and expects and is aligned with what you're trying to do in the products that you carry and how you carry them. If you are not aligned with the customer, that's when we have problems in the performance of the assortment or in keeping up and being proactive and being a stealth competitor around price. So what's at stake if you are able to rationalize your assortments? We've seen companies improve their gross profit between 2 and 6%. They've also been able to increase their unit volume by 0.5 point to 3.5%, and sales between 0.5 point and 3.2%. Now this is very important to think about these benefits, and one of the things that we caution is that these benefits are not all cumulative. They might have been, one retailer may have wanted to maximize profit at the expense of volume and sales or otherwise. So I don't want to pretend to suggest that rationalizing your assortment will gain these improvements at the same time across these measures. But what we do know is that there are significant opportunities when companies carefully look at their assortments, they understand what their customers expect, and they apply the techniques that leaders have applied in improving the way they price and improving the way that they assort for their customers. So finally, I have, before I pass over the mic to Sudhir, I have some recommendations. I would encourage you to work to know your customer better than your competitor. So if your competitor is Amazon, that's a pretty steep climb because they know them very well. But that's also a competitive advantage that Amazon has. And so I would encourage you to work diligently to know your customer better than your competitors. I would encourage you to adopt a flexible multi-channel pricing strategy. One price does not fit all, and it creates problems that are maybe unintended and may be difficult to overcome if that is the strategy that you pursue. Also, I would encourage companies to emphasize their differences, emphasize the assortment differences, the services differences, and proclaim the differences as they occur. Let the customer understand why you're different. Further, increasing maturity around consumer centricity is an absolute must. And we see retailers who are doing this in spades, and their performance has shot through the roof. You know, I would call out Kroger and Macy's as great examples of retailers who really understand consumer centricity and have deployed it in people and processes and technology. And you can look at their performance, and almost to the moment that they became and engaged in their journey to become consumer-centric, they also changed their performance in the marketplace. And then finally, as I've talked about around assortment and space, I think it's critically important to become a stealth competitor and to not be so easy to be picked off, and to learn about your competitors and understand the opportunities that exist in ways that allow you to address your customers in opportunities and choices that represent differentiation in the marketplace. So with that, I hope that this has been helpful for you. Certainly, if you have questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to me. You can also reach me via Twitter. I'm happy to engage in conversations with you there. And I'll pass the baton over to Sudhir, and I'm engaged and interested in hearing what he has to say.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for that very engaging presentation. Love the part about being a stealth competitor for obvious reasons. Hello, everyone. My name is Sudhir. I head the Retail and CPG Business Unit for UGM. My presentation is going to be focused on the how. How do you become a stealth competitor? What demand signals do you leverage, and for what? And I'm going to be illustrating it with a few examples and case studies. And here's the first one. So what do you think is common across all these products that you see on the slide? The first one is a Bluetooth headset manufactured by LG. The second one is a luggage set, I think, manufactured by Rockland. The third one is a girl's bracelet kit called Rainbow Loom. The fourth one is chalkboard contact paper, essentially paper that you can stick on the wall and then you can use it as a chalkboard. The fifth one is almond oil. The sixth one is an acupressure massage roller. The last one is a card set called Cards Against Humanity. And your choices are: list of items to be marooned on with a desert island. Warren Buffett owns a stake in all these companies. All of them are manufactured in China. All of them are high in demand, yet most brick and mortar retailers don't carry them. And finally, Sudhir and Kevin get a commission on the sale of these items. I'm not going to do an audience poll here since all of you would have obviously picked one. But the answer, the not so obvious answer is, all of them are high in demand, yet most brick and mortar retailers don't carry them. Now, all of these products have been giving out signals that suggest high demand. Your consumer has been telling you that these are high demand products, I like them. But most brick and mortar retailers are still not aware of the underlying trend. Let me start with an example. Here's Rainbow Loom. I spent a weekend going around stores trying to find this for my 10-year-old daughter. I live in Illinois, and this item was probably just catching on in Illinois then. Since I needed instant gratification, wanted to buy it from a store, went to several stores, no luck. Finally ended up in a small franchise store called Learning Express, which told me that the item has been selling like hotcakes, and 50% of the traffic that day was because of this item. Now look at the demand signals on this item. I mean, look at Google Trend, right? Indicating that the trend first originated in Georgia, then spread to Florida, then New Jersey, and then Illinois, and is spreading to other states as well. I mean, look at the localization trend that the consumer is bombarding you with. This is a high margin item, a high demand item, yet most bigger retailers are not aware of it till it started getting reported on Wall Street Journal a few days back. Consider another item, a little bit more boring this time. It's chalkboard contact paper. You stick the paper on the wall and it turns into a chalkboard. Very high demand signals. I mean, if you can notice, 2009 to 2011 is when the category came into being. Selling extremely well on eBay and Amazon, yet most office supplies retailers don't even know this category exists. The next item is a personal favorite, since I own it. I was influenced by our CTO, and I in turn influenced Kevin, who's also now a proud owner. Again, look at the trend. Doing extremely well in the marketplace based on reviews, is among the products with the highest increase in search volume on terms related to Bluetooth headsets. Right, so people are searching for Bluetooth headsets, and the highest increase in search volume is on LG Bluetooth headsets. Yet only two retailers carry it. One is Amazon, the other is Best Buy. The product was introduced back in 2010. The first retailer other than Best Buy essentially Best Buy started carrying it in 2013. Why, you ask? It's because retailers continue to rely on their suppliers to tell them what is hot, rely on NPD Nielsen to tell them what's selling in stores, that the signals that the consumers are blasting with you gets ignored. Consider all the different things that a consumer is telling you with this product. I need a product that can be used for making both calls and for music. I need a headset that isn't always on the ear. I need a headset that I can wear when in the gym. I like headsets with long battery life. Hence the point about data being democratic, but insights aren't. The signals are all there. Consumers are freely and constantly telling you what they want, what they like, what price they're willing to pay for it. Now, if only a retailer would listen to it instead of having to rely on translated data or having to rely on suppliers. In our research, we have found that most retailers have less than a 30% coverage of the product sets with the highest demand signals, essentially signals that screen bestseller. How then does a retailer leverage these different demand signals to improve merchandise planning? Do I have the right product? Do I have it priced right? Have I described it appropriately? Assortment, pricing, content. For a retailer, it's a constant trade-off between all these. There's no right or wrong answer, as Kevin pointed out earlier. There is, however, an informed answer and a choice to make. The next few slides, I'm going to illustrate it using the Bluetooth headsets category. The scores here, since we all like report cards and numbers, the first score there, which is the assortment score, is a measure of how well the assortment breadth of a retailer captures the products that have the potential of becoming a bestseller. Higher the score, more is the coverage of the potential bestsellers. Content score is a measure of how well the retailer is describing the product in two ways. One, for getting traffic to the product, and secondly, for keeping the consumer engaged and interested. The pricing score is a function of the pricing difference with the lowest price in the market. A -2 for Amazon, for example, in here indicates that Amazon is on an average 2% higher than the lowest price in the market, considering all the Bluetooth headsets in the market. As you can see, Sears has done a great job on pricing. For the Bluetooth headsets that they have, only 9% higher than the lowest priced in the market. But from the assortment side, they have a very poor assortment breadth. They do have Bluetooth headsets, but doesn't seem to be the ones that are selling well in the market. Now keep in mind that for the purposes of this analysis, we excluded marketplace items. On the other hand, if you look at Office Max and Staples, both of them have done a decent job in picking the right items for their assortment, but are way too expensive. Now again, this may be a conscious choice. Maybe the price doesn't matter for the segment that they're targeting. The important thing being that it should be a conscious and educated decision. And making the choice first starts with understanding which products are resonating well with my consumer base. Which products are likely to do well in the holiday period? Do I have the right products in my assortment? On the x-axis here, you see a proprietary demand index derived from various demand signals. On the y-axis is the rating of the product across different retailers. The color indicates the number of retailers carrying the item and hence the competitive intensity. The size of the balloon indicates the number of product reviews. As you move from left to right, the probability that a product is likely to be a bestseller increases because the DDI, or the Democratic Demand Index, is higher. This graph reflects the top 50 Bluetooth headsets for this holiday season. One obvious interpretation is that a product with a review less than 3.5 or so in the market has a lower probability of making it to the top 50 list. The next step in making the choice is to decide where you want to be. Do you want to have a broad assortment, or do you want to focus on being the more efficient retailer? Again, what do you choose? In this case, Staples and Office Max have the most efficient assortment. I don't know, that may be a conscious strategy, or it may be just happens by chance. I may also choose a conscious strategy of not being focused on individual products, but to be focused on trends instead. Let's look at what the trends have to say. The sentiment and attribute analysis of the top 50 point out some very interesting trends. Behind the head or around the neck headsets is rapidly increasing popularity. No points in guessing where the assortment mostly is on for majority of retailers. Majority of the retailers still have a bulk of their assortment focused on over the year. Stereo is obviously doing well. It's in line with the trend of smartphones. Headsets are not just for making calls, they're for music. Multi-point, which is a Bluetooth headset connected to multiple devices, was expected to do well, but seems like consumers are no longer finding that to be a high utility item. Also, what was interesting on our side is when you throw the science at it, what we observed is that when you do a regression analysis on the attributes against the price point, consumers right now are willing to pay around a 25 to 50% higher premium for headsets which are stereo and for headsets which go around the neck. Sentiment analysis corroborates a lot of it. Battery life seems to be getting a lot of attention. Also, what seems to be emerging as a trend is the trend of headsets which are so-called, within quotes, activity friendly, that I can use when exercising, that I can use in the gym. But having the right assortment is not enough. What about pricing? And Kevin alluded to that in his presentation earlier. The pricing scores that you see on the screen are based on price difference. Right now, they do not take into account the competitive elasticity into account. It's important, however, for a retailer, though, to understand that for their consumer segment, who are they competing with and what is the competitive elasticity of the assortment? Do my sales drop when Amazon drops their price or when Staples drop their price? Understanding that allows you to take decisions that do not leave money on the table. There are other signals that consumers are giving as well. So obviously all competitors are not created equal. Who are you really competing with? All consumers aren't created equal either. Should I be competing on price or should it be on offers? How focused should I be on a private label strategy? Does my consumer segment change by the day of the week, by the time of the day? Should I change prices accordingly? And again, going back to one of the points that Kevin mentioned earlier, the day of one uniform pricing across multiple channels is over. Consumers are okay with changing the price across channels. Now, how frequently do you want to change prices? How often do you want to do it? Do you really want to skim the additional margin that comes from it? Is all decisions that you have to make. Now let's assume that pricing is also optimal, right? My consumer segment believes in my assortment and the value that I provide them. Is that enough? Does content matter? As you can see in this table, the content scores across retailers are more or less in a stable range of around 29 to 54. What's missing here though is the differentiation between the top products and the rest. In case of Amazon, the content scores for the top 50 products are around 40% higher than the score for the rest of the assortment. Look at this graph. On the x-axis, you see the content scores. Now the content scores are calculated based on a set of metrics associated with traffic and content on the website and so on and so forth. On the y-axis, we've taken reviews on their website as a demand signal indicator. It's very clear that on an average again, higher content does tend to give you higher demand signals. Doesn't always hold true, as you can see from the outliers, but have a pretty high statistical significance. Now, to illustrate that with an example, take the case of this Jabra Easy Go headset. Ranked 33rd on a list of predicted bestsellers, doing reasonably well in terms of positive reviews. Now consider the price points and the content scores. CS is priced pretty competitively, right? So the Amazon price is $26.64, CS is priced at $26.59 when we took the snapshot. But look at the Amazon and the CS scores on content, 98 and 29. CS is behind on most of the content assets that are required for traffic conversion. Good image resolution, but no reviews. Product description is not adequate, no videos. Staples, in spite of being $10 higher, is doing better in terms of demand signals than CS. How does a retailer put all of these together? Now, these are steps based on our experience working with 9 of the top 25 retailers in the US. Obviously, start with benchmarking, know where you stand, also understand where you want to stand, find out what consumers truly want, become that consumer-centric enterprise. What trends do you want to piggyback on? Understand the trade-offs. Do I want to compete on price, or is private label my strategy? Do I want to win on content or on price? Or do I want to offer a long-tail marketplace assortment? What is the conscious strategy that you're going to employ to be competitive in the market? Based on the understanding of the gaps, take steps to fill those gaps. Price dynamically taking into account both internal constraints and the competitive elasticity. Too often we've noticed that retailers tend to react to the lowest price in the market. You're leaving margin on the table. Your prices may not be sensitive or to that particular competitor that you're reacting to. Understand your competitive intensity across different retailers. One size doesn't fit all, certainly, when it comes to content. For your identified top sellers, have a content grade which is above the rest. Put videos. Incentivize your customers to post reviews. Use high resolution images. Tell a story. We are Ugam. We are a bunch of geeks who believe in the power of data, big or small, doesn't really matter, except as marketing collateral. We do, however, have a passionate belief in the power of free and democratic data to influence key retailer decisions. We work with 9 of the top 25 retailers in the US and have had lots of fun along the way. Thank you all for listening. Time for questions, I think. But just to preempt a few that have been asked, almond oil in the list of bestsellers is new hot item for body oil. It's apparently very good for the skin. Don't ask me why. Printed luggage sets are all the rage. Gets you a $20 premium. And Cards Against Humanity is an adult-friendly card game which is currently the top-selling toy on Amazon. Back to you, Harry.
Excellent. Thanks, Kevin and Sudhir, for giving our attendees plenty to think about when it comes to interpreting and leveraging consumer insights. There are a lot of things on it that I thought were fascinating, just from watching on this side. At this point, we're going to go ahead and shift gears, as mentioned, and move to the Q&A portion of the event. I just want to remind our attendees that this is your chance to interact with our speakers. So if you have a question, please type it in now. We've got a few in the queue already, so let's go ahead and get started. This one is for Kevin. What information should be on our website that customers will want to see in order for them to purchase from my store rather than from someone else's?
Sure. Thanks, Harry. We're seeing a number of things that companies are beginning to include in their websites. So, for example, a clear understanding of the delivery options. So you have the item and then the delivery options. In many cases, there are delivery options that vary by item. And it's important to be clear about that up front and not find out about it later after you've put it in the basket. It's one of the reasons why people abandon baskets. Delivery is not something that the customer is interested in. Another is availability of inventory. Is the item even available to purchase? Or is there one or two left? And when can you have this item at the soonest? I think some cues that we see in Amazon sites are valuable, but also cues that we see from others. For example, the inventory is available in the store nearest you. So while you can take delivery tomorrow or the next day, you could also go directly to a store that's near you and pick up the item right then and there. We also think it's important to make sure that you have a full description of the product and that you have a robust description of the product. In fact, many consumers choose who they buy by how much information is included on the view of the item. In essence, who knows more about the product is how the customer is translating as one of the areas. And then I think it's also very valuable as consumers report to include other customer recommendations and their experiences as they buy the products. Now, people like Home Shopping Network have been doing this for 30 years, when they have people call in and they say, I bought this item and this item's a great item. Well, all we're really now seeing is the website really collecting that information and making it a sustainable and repeatable process. But it's an area that has influenced shoppers for a long time. I think it's also important to include comparative items and items that other customers have either looked at or purchased when they have looked at or purchased the item that the customer is currently looking at. So those are some of the important items. And we're seeing some on the outside who are also including the competitor prices. So here's our price, and here are the prices of our competitors with a date stamp or a time stamp, so that the consumer has confidence that the price that they're being presented is a appropriate and good price. So those are some of the things.
Okay. This is for Sudhir. How accurate is your demand indicator in predicting best sellers?
So we did a study for a couple of categories and going back a couple of years, right? So what we tried to do is, based on data that's available as of Jan of a particular year, try and predict what the best sellers would be in December. Now, for certain categories, the statistical significance was as high as 80 to 90%. But for certain other products or categories, the statistical significance came down to around, say, 40 to 50%. And what we found is that the nature of the product makes a difference. The more involved the purchase, the more research a consumer does on the purchase, the statistical significance in predicting the bestsellers is high. If an item is more impulse purchase, it's something that I pick up when I'm walking out of a store, the statistical significance actually drops a bit. But overall, I would say around 75-80% significance.
Okay. Here is one that's a little detailed, so I'll go slowly, make sure we pick everything up. It says, how far behind on average would you say most large retailers are on bringing in a hot new item? Let's say Google Trends and other big data platforms are showing that new Bluetooth headset will sell really well on day one. What day does a large retailer bring in that item on average?
So it's a very interesting question. Now, what we found is that let's put retailers into two buckets. There are retailers who essentially sell their own items, and there are marketplaces. Marketplaces we have found are very efficient when it comes to getting a new item to the market, because it's not just the buyer making the decision, it's the supplier network that they own making the decision as well. When it comes to large retailers, however, we have found that if the item is not something which is manufactured by a large well-known manufacturer, the item is delayed by 6 months, a year and a half. What we've found consistently is that buyers seem to rely on their suppliers to tell them what's selling well, rather than the market. And most big retailers do this mistake.
Okay. Here's one for Kevin. How are teams equipped to handle this data?
Well, that is the million-dollar question. And as I look at the industry, we're seeing a number of retailers that are beginning to acquire technologies that help them collect the information and then manage it and apply it to decisions. But this is not necessarily the typical big data problem. It is very specific to a very specific audience. Retailers struggle if all that they do is create a way to collect the information and store it, because there's so much information. It's important that in addition to the collection and the storage, that business decision makers have tools that help them make decisions in process. So if I'm making a decision on the price of an item or including or excluding an item from the assortment, I shouldn't need to go off and do a 3-hour exploration of the data and then come back and make my decision. Should be part of the process, should include a workflow for entrance and exits into the current merchandising process that allows for opportunities for insight-driven decisions. If it is a hard effort to get some of this information, we find that only the best merchants are using it, and the average and then those that are even below average are typically not using this to the best capabilities, and the technology becomes underutilized. So thinking about adoption and the tools to drive decision is really important aspect of doing this right. But there's a lot of opportunity, and there are lots of different ways that people are after this, but I can tell you that in my conversations, it's a high topic for everybody that I speak to.
Okay. This, I believe, would be for Sudhir. We have already made an investment in price elasticity systems. What do you mean by competitive elasticity?
So let me explain that, taking an example, right? So if you consider grocery retail, where you have control to a large extent over the shopping environment, the consumer comes to your shop and then you are trying to figure out the change in sales based on the change in price. So that's where your normal elasticity systems come into play. What we're finding in the market, however, is that given showrooming, given what's happening in the market with respect to a broader category of items, my sales would drop not because I have increased my price. My sales could also drop because a competitor of mine has reduced their price, which means that the price difference between me and my competitor has gone up. Now that's what we mean by competitive elasticity. Very often in the work that we do, we've found that retailers tend to react to saying, okay, Amazon is the lowest price, I want to be X percentage points above Amazon in the price, or I want to be the second lowest or the third lowest. They don't really take into account which competitors actually matters. You'll find that for a number of products, the competitive set, who you're competing with, matters, and that's where the competitive elasticity comes into play.
Okay. We have time for maybe one or two more questions. Let's see. Okay. What types of items are ripe for this type of predictive analysis? Movies, new releases, clothing, electronics?
I would say that the predictive analysis is applicable for all categories. The level at which it's applicable changes, however. So if I consider electronics or I consider movies, I can get into predicting of the individual items. However, if I take into account clothing, you're making prediction on a trend at a broader level. You're making a prediction on which colors would be hot or which type of product would be hot. I mean, like in the Bluetooth example that we took, you're trying to make predictions not on the LG Bluetooth headset. You're trying to make predictions saying, I need to have higher number of stereo headsets in my assortment, or I need to describe my assortment more from a perspective of them being gym friendly. So the level at which the analysis is applicable is different, but I think the predictive analysis is definitely applicable across categories.
Okay. I think we have time for one more quick one if we can keep the answer short. Someone wants to know if the review process is a level playing field. Does UGAM rate review platforms?
The answer is easy. We don't rate review platforms. What we use reviews for, along with other demand signals, is to identify trends. And it does become a little bit of a chicken and egg situation. We've noticed that positive reviews, seeding of reviews does tend to increase demand. But if the product is not genuinely good, then the reviews or the ratings start dropping automatically. So it's so reviews does matter. It's one of several different signals, but we don't rate review platforms.
Okay, I think we can squeeze one quick one left for Kevin. This is a question that immediately came to my mind. It says, you mentioned consumers are okay with different prices across different channels. Do bricks and mortar locations need to match online pricing, or is there a way to mitigate this concern?
Yeah, thank you, Harry. I think the strategy is clear. Different prices in different channels is not only acceptable, but it's appropriate. I think it's also very important to make sure that you're clear with your sales staff and your employees about what your policies are and what you do. You may have a special buy for online that is a different price than in the stores, and you just say this is an online-only deal or price. And when it comes to matching, you have retailers that clearly in their own websites declare that the online or the .com of their brand is not a competitor and they do not match prices. So it's about stating clearly what your strategy is, how you approach things when your customers ask questions, and how you communicate up front what your pricing is and your pricing strategy. And so those are important elements. Now, if anyone on the phone would like to go into greater detail, certainly please reach out to me via Twitter or through my email address that was listed, and I'd be happy to go into greater detail with the strategies and the approaches and the techniques that leading companies are using.
Excellent. Great stuff. I'd like to thank Kevin and Sudhir for sharing their insights with us today, UGAM Solutions for sponsoring the event, and all the attendees who joined us on this call for your attention and participation. Remember, the archive of this presentation will be available for viewing for the next 12 months, so you can watch it again or refer to a colleague. If you'd like to download a PDF version of this presentation, you may do so by visiting the Events Resources area in the lower left side of your screen. In addition, UGAM has provided 3 additional documents that you may be interested in. Amazon's content strategy revealed, 4 unconventional levers to increase margins by 3%, and 3 new consumer insights to improve conversions through content. These are also available for download from the Event Resources dropdown. Thanks again for joining us, and have a great day.